When you started off in manufacturing, Ashok, the concept of the supply chain almost was coming into focus. So, what were your early recollections of what you needed to do then?
Yeah, I think excellent question. I think when I started, this was in the early '90s that I started my career as an engineer. I did the usual typical work. Went and worked in a factory. I was a manufacturing engineer, and then what we used to do was figuring out what materials we needed for a particular, production day or a production
Right,
schedule. It was all very sort of centered around just a factory, and there was no concept of a supply chain uh, back then. Um,
right,
I was also fortunate enough and this was in the U.S. So I was then went to Eastern Europe, where the Soviet Union had just sort of collapsed, and some of the Soviet bloc countries were now free to exercise whatever, pursue the Western European model and American model. So I went to set up a factory in Hungary, and as part of that, we were moving a lot of material back and forth from the US, which introduced me to the idea of logistics. But even there, it was a very
right.
uh, sort of challenging task back then, because you're tracking items right from, let's say, the US all the way through to Amsterdam and then inland within Europe. And, it was pretty complex. Uh,
I can imagine, which
it
is
was,
what we'll talk about as
yeah,
we get into the
that's
show.
pretty complex.
Okay. You order something on any e commerce site and it arrives at your doorstep maybe the very next day. There is an invisible or a completely hidden set of things that are set in motion when you place the order. And today's guest is going to tell us, unveil what really happens behind the scenes, because he's not just had a ringside seat, he's been in the thick of the action. Ashok Vasan started off in manufacturing, but then saw that technology would have a major impact on practically every aspect of how everything was bought, sold, and moved. So today's episode is going to be about a career that mixes several skills, most of which had to be learned and implemented in very quick time because the world was changing as fast as the supply chain would allow. So let me welcome Ashok to the program and figure out how exactly his career evolved in a time of intense change. Ashok, welcome to the show and great to have you.
Venu, thanks. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. And I think that was an excellent introduction.
Okay, thank you. So let's pick up the thread from what you started off in your early days. Did you have a sense of where you wanted your career to be going, or what you thought would be important, or did it just evolve?
It was a little bit of both. I did do I went to the US after my undergrad, as a lot of kids back in the late '80s did, to
Right.
pursue graduate programs. So I knew that I wanted to be an engineer. So that part was pretty clear. After I graduated, I worked as a manufacturing engineer, like I said, in the US. Uh, but soon thereafter, I also sort of figured that I needed to understand more about business, just out of a curiosity to know what finance is, what economics is, and other disciplines. So I did get an MBA along the way as well, and through a combination of roles that I got to play in my very first company, which was both first initially manufacturing and then subsequently logistics, and my MBA, I sort of moved into uh, a role which had a little bit of, you know, uh, application of principles that are cross-functional and cross-discipline. What we didn't call that supply chain at that time, but eventually that's what
Yeah.
it got to be. So it was a combination of some of the interests that I have, but also the changing times sort of put me at the heart of what is today known as supply chain.
Right. So, do you remember in the manufacturing company that you were in, what was among the first tech programs that you implemented? What was it for?
Yeah. So, incidentally, back then we had some of the most advanced uh, technologies as it came to the context of manufacturing. In the graduate program that I was in, late 80s, 89, 1991, believe it or not, uh, artificial intelligence was a thing. So,
Okay.
you know, but it was limited to a certain extent to manufacturing and assembly processes, and to a certain degree in warehousing. So how
Hmm.
automatic storage and retrieval systems, ASR as they used to call it, uh, you know. Uh, paint systems for the equipment that we used to assemble, having robotic uh, uh, machines to assemble as well as paint, goes into some of the uh, more I guess processes which needed consistency, welding and those kinds of
Right.
processes. Typically, if it's manual, there is a chance for quality issues to creep in. Paint, which can be inconsistent. So, we started to see how AI was starting to, get infused into robotic applications. Not as sophisticated as what it is today, but AI was
Right.
a thing back then. So that
Right.
that was just beginning at that point, and it was quite fascinating.
And I can see almost from what you just told me that the process of moving any manufactured good from the factory to the final product place where it would be used, if you manage to save the time either in transport or in storage or in transit, and if you manage to play around with these, that's where the efficiencies came in, right? Because any inventory that was stuck in a warehouse for a long time was building up. It was like cash locked away.
It is cash locked away. You're 100% right. So the main uh, exercise in supply chain is to balance demand and supply.
Right.
The simplest way of defining what supply chains are is to synchronize demand and supply, the nature of which changes depending on the product and industry. So if it is something that we
Right.
buy off the shelf, it is more immediate. So if we order
Right.
something, uh, and an item reaches within 15 minutes, it means the product has to be placed very close with a fulfillment system that is at your doorstep within 15 minutes. But if it is, for instance, an aircraft, or a much more complex product, there's a different sort of planning process that is involved and execution process that's involved. So determining, what the uh, the constraints are, what the requirements are, what the lead times are, in order to balance or synchronize this demand and supply is what it's all about. And technology plays a huge role in making sure that bit of information becomes very, very uh, available to make the right decisions.
Okay, so when did you decide to focus on technology as the aspect that would drive your career? Because I don't know if it was a conscious choice, or was it something that again happened as a matter of, because you got drawn into it and you had to solve problems which were focused on technology, which is why that became the way your career moved?
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, when I was doing my MBA, and this was in Chicago, and it's well known to be a feeder school to Wall Street. And so got a very strong
Okay.
finance and accounting background. Um Now, for one thing, I really wasn't into finance and accounting at that time, but I was very much into operations, because I came from a manufacturing background. Now,
Okay.
the next logical, or at that point, the next logical career path was consulting. McKinsey, Booz, PwC, AT
Right.
Kearney were some of the companies, and back then it wasn't PwC; it was PricewaterhouseCoopers. So that was one path that I could have pursued, and I was interested for a while. But coincidentally, I came across my second company, which I eventually went and joined, which was in technology. And it was very interesting because the contrast between consulting and what I was doing. This was a company called I2 Technologies back. It's
Okay.
now been acquired and it's gone through a different branding exercise. But what became apparent was that in the consulting sphere, processes could be defined, redesigned, etc. But it still was at that time just a report or a design on paper. Uh, the technology aspect of it for me seemed to be closing the loop. Not only did we have to understand the processes and redesign it with the infusion of technology, we were now able to implement it and get to see the results. That to me
Okay.
was, it was actually an epiphany, and I said, this is what
Yeah.
makes sense. It was a little bit against the grain, given that most people were either going into consulting or finance from where I was graduating, but it was kind of a bet that I took, driven by just a sense that I think we could have make greater impact with this use of technology.
Yeah.
I haven't sort of. I'm glad I did it. That's one decision which I kind of stumbled upon, and I sort of thank myself that I had sense
So
to
give me an
recognize it.
instance of one specific thing that you did at that point. Because, while you've talked about the overall thing, if you could dig
Yep.
into one of the changes that happened, which was, to you, a very satisfying aspect.
No, I think it was in the context of my first client. You
Okay.
know, the it was up in Minnesota back in the day. The way people used to do the processes that people used to do was everything was siloed. People would do sales planning, which is basically forecasting, and these uh, 3M makes all kinds of products. Fantastic company in terms of how innovative they are. They make
Right.
sandpaper, they make scotch tape, they make post-it notes.
Right.
The whole Scotch Brite, and
Yeah.
the brands are absolutely
Right.
phenomenal. But the function at that time, given where companies learned how to organize, was sales planning, sales forecasting. Marketing was a different sort of function doing its thing, and then eventually, and manufacturing was driven more by factory utilization. How much I can keep the factory humming and running.
Right.
Um, and what we were setting out to do, which was pioneering in many ways back in the day, I'm talking 95, 96, was to now build an entire interconnected, demand process trickling all the way back to the factory, and then figuring out what the factory had and, sending it all the way back.
Right.
Two things, I must say that there was this notion at that time of what is known as the beer game, and it was actually carried out in B schools, which
Okay.
basically demonstrated what is known as a whiplash effect. So
Okay.
it starts off with the end consumer, buying, let's say, a six pack of beer, and
Right.
how as you move upstream into the supply chain, the signal gets sort of changed, either amplified and we would do this simulation in real life, right? So by the time it reached, the production center or the central distribution center, because these are all sort of mass produced items, uh, there would be all kinds of seesawing, and you would see the inventory building up,
Yeah.
you know, and you would see either massive amounts of inventory in one area or completely, a shortage in another area. And we got to sort of very starkly see what really happens in business and in,
Yeah.
in real life. So that
When you
was
mentioned, sorry, the six
yeah,
pack, an anecdote came to mind that apparently when it was time for a big ball game in the US,
yeah.
um, supermarkets apparently used to keep diapers right next to the beer counter because guys used to come and buy beer and they didn't want to be disturbed during the game. So the sale of diapers
100%.
went.
100%. Absolutely. And since you mentioned diapers, right around, the
Yeah,
96, 97 time period, what I also,
right.
we had our first child. I
Yeah,
got to see firsthand the direct focus in the way in which P&G and Kimberly Clark, these guys were the big, diaper brands. They would target me. I mean, from the time we checked into our OBGYN till the time they could track exactly where we were in the pregnancy cycle,
I
and
see.
they tracked the birth of the child. And then every week I would get coupons alternating. It was fascinating that that was so coordinated, but they were not communicating with production necessarily, and so these
Okay.
are all certain stark examples to just say the how important it was that you had this bi-directional propagation of information, starting from the demand all the way through production, and then to bring it back forward into the system. And the complexity is really having it at the right place at the right time, rather than it being aggregated. You're a brand person. People talk. They used to plan in categories. Uh,
Right.
and probably at a SKU level, not at a SKU level, they couldn't, and they definitely couldn't break it down into a weekly level because they just didn't have the wherewithal, either compute power or the statistical models. So technology starts to now come in and starts to bring in that level of capability into the system. So these things started to become very, very apparent even when I was at 3M. Say how we synchronize or basically propagate the flow of information all the way from point of demand through the various nodes in the supply chain all the way back, and then propagate it back as well. So you're not promoting a product which is going to be stocked out, for instance, or if you're going or going to be in short
Very
supply.
true.
That's yeah.
So two things here, Ashok. One is that the moment you start tracking things, um, it's like an endless zoom in because if you manage to optimize one part of the chain, there's another thing that goes slightly off kilter. Since
Hmm.
there are so many dynamic factors which come in.
Yeah.
And here, it's something that almost works like the quantum effect. The moment you start looking at it, it
Yeah.
changes. Or like
Yeah.
several people begin to look at it and optimize for that, the whole thing changes all over again.
Yeah.
So let's say if you had five companies which were focused on one particular point and then optimize their chains for a certain behavior,
Yeah.
then people would suddenly either deviate because they were not driven by what the company is going to do. They were driven
Yeah.
by what they felt they had to do.
Right.
So that I think will always be a kind of unknown factor as far as most companies go. Or do you think that that is a
No, I mean
change?
it's very true. It's really the local optima versus the global optima. Uh,
Right.
yeah. So I'll sort of deconstruct that in a couple of different ways, right? So holistically speaking, a supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And so when you're at the supply chain design stage, figuring out where that constraint, and the weak link is not really a weakness, right, but as much as it's the constraint. So if you have, if production, you have all the capacity in the world, but you're constrained by the ability to move, that becomes your focus area. And
Right.
once you solve that problem, you might actually, to your point, expose the next weakest link. So the discipline itself starts off as supply chain design, supply chain planning, supply chain execution. So organizations have now figured it out to say, what does my overall network look like? Where are my demand patterns? And that's going to keep changing. Today I might be in a localized market, let's say South India, but tomorrow I want to, open up a new market. I might be India focused, I want to open up Southeast Asia, and so on, right? So you've got to that's an ongoing exercise to make sure my design of the supply chain is constant. And in a global context now, supply points are changing. Because now we are in Tamil Nadu right now, and I just read in the papers that um, the number of mobile phones being shipped out of Tamil Nadu has grown, probably 10, 15 times, which is
Wow.
insane over the last just over 10 years. So, which means, the downstream, whoever it is that is consuming or placing these orders, it might be Samsung, it might be Apple, it might be any of the big mobile companies. They have to they've planned their supply network accordingly. Now, same way, now once you do that, your planning processes are in alignment with that, how the network is designed, and then you're executing as per the plan. But you've got to be able to do all of these, which involves analysis to say, what are my choke points? uh, where am I going to
Right.
see any kinds of misses on either on supply, or on the ability to fulfill, or on the ability to sort of understand whether I'm able to sense demand or not. So that to be and that
Which,
happens both with operational experience as well as through tech.
okay. I'll just make the announcements and come back.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking to Ashok Vasan, who's been working deeply in supply chain technology. And as he mentioned, when he started off, it was in manufacturing, but there were a whole lot of problems that needed to be solved, and technology was the enabler. So, in every part of the process, whether it was warehousing, whether it was shipping, or whether it was actually getting products to market, there were optimizations required. And Ashok had this sense of being having to handle so many complex transformations, because if you look at it, the earlier things were all manual. Everything moved on land. You sent letters, you didn't send email. So when one part of that process suddenly gets much faster, it has a ripple effect on several other aspects. Like he just mentioned, Tamil Nadu in the last 10 years or so has increased the number of mobile phones that it ships tenfold, which means that the supply chain, which was originally focused on China, now needs to move to India, which becomes an India focus. And probably another 10 years down the line, it'll have to move to another geography depending on how that particular region evolves. So, the great part of this is the dynamism and the amount of learning that it takes in order to configure different aspects. So it's almost like a juggling game where you have not just one or two or five or six balls up in the air, but you have a whole set of things in between which there are various other things coming at you, which is the great part about what a career in supply chain tech is about. In the next segment, I'll be talking to Ashok about salaries and how career paths actually are defined in this fast changing scenario. So, what is a person who is looking at salaries or entry points? What are what is your advice for people coming into the profession right now?
First of all, I think people who um are coming fresh out of college um should definitely look at supply chain as a long-term career option,
Okay.
because it is a mission critical function for companies. And it is a function as much as manufacturing used to be at one point in time. Now, there is a position called a chief supply chain officer. And that's the change
Right.
that's happened, over the last 25, 30 years. And therefore, people who come in should come in with a sense of uh, the importance of the function, the longevity of building a career, long-term career in it, and come in with the sense of being great problem solvers and people who like breaking a problem down, trying to figure out what the root cause is, troubleshooting it, designing a solution for it, and implementing it. It could be day to day, or it could be a longer term issue. Remember, I talked about design, planning, execution. Each of those have their element of problem solving. It's
Right.
just that the time window is short. So look at it in that fashion. Look at it in the from the standpoint that you can be in any industry. You could be in fast moving consumer goods industry today, solving this the supply demand synchronization problem essentially. Tomorrow you could be in manufacturing company making uh, automobiles. So it's a very transferable skill set because you're oriented around thinking hey, at the end of the day I'm merely synchronizing supply and demand. Personally, I actually went from tech to working at a contact center because that's how applicable the skill sets are. Where
Right.
at a contact center, you're basically the volume of calls is really the demand, and available agents to take
Right.
those calls is your supply. So yeah, so I think supply chain is something which I would definitely encourage people
So,
to pursue.
yeah. So, what are typical starting salaries like? And supply chain companies, obviously, you're working in a company which is part of that chain. So, does it mean that you join a company that is into warehousing, that is into shipping, that's into manufacturing, that is into tech? Because you have these three or four choices, right?
Yeah,
Because if you were into manufacturing, then you will understand from a manufacturing perspective what are the aspects of the supply chain that you need to focus on. If you're into shipping, then you're into the actual movement, and then you're trying
yep,
to figure out what happens.
yeah.
And then if you're into storage, that is another aspect. And if you're into tech, then you're solving problems at all the points of interconnect.
Yeah. So I think the entry level salaries and all of those are true, and I think it's absolutely fine. There are a lot of great shipping companies, logistics companies, 3PLs, which are looking for fresh grads who are essentially playing um, the role of either operational or analytical, and both of these
Right.
are essential. Starting salaries could range anywhere from, I want to say, you know 7 lpa to 15 to 18 lpa, depending on the company, depending on the specific function and role that you are playing, and where you're obviously also graduating from. um, it's a matter of uh, where you are also in. If you're in the transportation and logistics space, chances are you'll be working probably in a fulfillment center, and figuring out, you know, how do I staff my warehouse? How do I um, and you're now at the forefront of execution. How
Right.
do I get the trucks to move my goods? That could be the level at which you are operating. If you are hired at the uh, let's say at headquarters, you're now looking at a more national sort of outlook. And all companies, all the big, the great companies in India, whether it is Hindustan Unilever or Asian Paints, or the Tata Group, all these people have analyst roles or planning roles or operational uh, uh, folks with either supply chain degrees or business degrees who are going to come in and start to you know add value straight away. On the technology side, again, there are now a lot of companies that are uh, uh, building products for each of these functions, whether it is uh, logistics software, or whether it is planning software, whether it is demand planning software, etc. And again, the range of salaries depends on your experience. uh, how many what technology you're familiar with, whether it is on the front end, on the user experience side, or on the back end, or if you're full stack. These are all high demand uh, sort of skill
So, are
set
there
that.
courses for these, Ashok, or is it that they have to specialize in something from online classes, or what is your suggestion for pursuing specifics that they are interested in?
No, there are courses. I would want to advise any early stage professional to definitely. And I was thinking about this even yesterday, because uh, recently I saw one of the founder of Zerodha making a comment that, hey, if you're 25 and you're going to a business school, you must be some kind of idiot. And I sort of thought about it, and I said, how true is it? And I was watching a couple of shows. The truth is, uh, MBA gives you, or any structured academic programs really only gives you a sampling. It's just it's not giving you the depth that you really want. Even if you want, account, you can't really take two courses in an MBA program, or in college, and say that I'm the expert. There are so many different aspects of managerial accounting, tax accounting, and what have you. So
Right,
you've got to sort of therefore look to build your skills outside. The same holds true even for engineering jobs, tech jobs. You're given certain assignments. You're doing, and all these programs are introducing you to the entire ecosystem of the tech world, whether it's databases, algorithms,
right.
compilers, and uh, some colleges have still not probably even evolved. So I think it is probably also unreasonable to expect colleges to be able to cover everything. Uh,
Exactly.
so therefore,
Yeah.
you definitely have to keep your eyes on the prize. You've got to say, hey, my interests lie in a particular area. Let's say it's technology, or whether it's a functional role, an operational role, and do your own course selection. Look around, find out. There are so many, obviously, now on
Right.
Coursera, or even universities, right? MIT offers a lot of operational level courses for you to pursue. Carnegie Mellon has a lot of courses. IIT Madras, is now even given
It's a lot of
mid-stage
course. Yeah.
professionals a chance to, enroll for specific, activities. So I think all these colleges have realized that, you know, um, the amount of uh, knowledge that they gain out of just a structured program is not sufficient. People need to educate themselves, and you have to be looking outside and not just limiting yourself to, or thinking that a degree is adequate and that you've got all the necessary information.
I'll just take off from what you started with, which is operational or analytical. I think that is a fundamental kind of understanding that you have to have about your own ability.
100%.
When you start working and then you say, okay, I'm good at operations, I like doing this stuff, or I like sitting back and analyzing what needs to be done. But in both, you need wonderful people skills, because it's not enough to analyze, you have to get things done. So
Correct.
even if it's a strategy, it has to be implemented. And
Correct.
even if it's operations, the kind of people that you deal with is again very important for you to be able to get along with them and understand and implement.
Correct.
Because at the end of the day, whether it's operation or analysis, you need implementation and execution skills, which I don't think universities can teach you.
Can
That you
teach.
have to teach yourself,
Right.
and you have to figure out what happens.
No, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think it's absolutely spot on. The only other thing I would add is, when you say you know your own self, uh, some people thrive uh, and are able to sort of work well with abstraction. So when you go into quote
Yeah.
unquote the analytical world, you're able to look at spreadsheets and numbers and a software screen and be able to sort of drill down and to be able to quickly zone in on the problem. So remember, I talked about troubleshooting, being able to identify, troubleshoot the problem, find the root cause analysis, and then fix the problem. Some people like to be more sort of experiential and they
Yeah.
need, if they're working, again, I come from manufacturing, so I used to be on a factory floor. I lean more towards the second category of, touch, feel,
Right.
solve problem, right? Understand what really the issues are. Um,
So give
so,
me an example of a troubleshooting issue that you solved, that you found and then you worked it through to change it.
uh, well, I mean, I think, by the time you go up sort of the managerial sort of ranks, so to speak, uh, you've got to, whether it's organizational design, whether it is uh, figuring out what markets you want to go after. And I'll talk about most recently, right? If we make uh, an enterprise grade uh, software. Now figuring out who our target segment is, who our target customers are, and what we need to concentrate on is, and why are we doing
Yeah.
that, is critical. So now we decided that that given that the size of the problem is big, the impact we could have was therefore greater, and that became the cornerstone of the strategy. And so we said, where can we make maximum impact with the solution, that we're, or with for the problems that we're trying to solve? We said fast moving
Right.
consumer goods is one. Now, once you have identified what your strategy is going to be and what market you're going to serve, you're going to have issues pertaining to execution, like exactly like you said. How do I, should I go after, and fast moving consumer goods comes in a variety of, is it food and beverage? Is it, personal care?
Right.
Is it, uh, apparel? Any of these kinds of things. And so be able to hone in and very quickly determine where you want to focus, which requires certain degree of analysis of financial reports. So that's why I'm saying you become cross discipline, multidiscipline kind of individual. You start to look at, let's say you compare a P&G and a Unilever and say, how do these guys compare? What are the impacts? What value can I add to this company? And therefore, if I was to hire a sales guy, I want him or her to go, focus on these particular accounts for this particular reason. So it's kind of abstract kind of problem solving. Uh, First, identifying the segment becomes important. What problem you're going to solve, for whom, and then how are you going to deliver the solution for them? And if it's not working, how do you make adjustments to fix the problem, both for you as a company primarily, because now my responsibility is to make sure that the software that we create reaches its
Right.
intended market. So I think to be able to quickly identify what you're setting out to achieve is very important. And I know you asked for a specific example. I'll tell you.
But
Yeah,
I also understand exactly where you're coming from, Ashok, because let's say, let's go back to 95 when Microsoft was looking at the operating system. At that point, it didn't exist. So I only had to educate people on what the operating system was and then capture that market.
yeah.
Today, you have a tech stack and you can't push a competitor out. You have to ensure that your product works with theirs as well, because the client says, I don't want disruption in terms of one tech not talking to the other,
Correct.
which means that it becomes like a fine kind of calibration of why you need this and why you have the other company's products as well. We play nice with that, but this is the additional benefits that we offer you, and it has
Correct.
to be borne out in the implementation. Otherwise, in most
Yeah,
cases, people will say, "No, I don't want to touch something, even if it's not broken. I don't want to disrupt it."
touch it. Correct. Right. Exactly,
So,
right. And I think consumer and customer behavior is now, they exercise a lot of influence and power on the way you got to shape your strategy. Gone
right,
are the days when you can keep it closed and proprietary. You've got to
right,
open it up and
right,
see how you can coexist and work together. I mean, Microsoft and Apple working together is, uh, was unthinkable at one
yeah.
point, but
But
not
but
anymore.
every company loves a walled garden. We can't get away from that. So I'll just
Right.
come back after the. So in the previous segment, I spoke to Ashok about salaries and entry points, and he had this wonderful way of putting it, which said that you have to decide whether you want to be work on the operational side or the analytical side, because there are roles open in all of the places that you choose to work in as parts of the supply chain. He also emphasized and underlined that a career in a supply chain is a long term proposition. It's something that will always be very important for companies to handle, which means that your job, if you do it well, is safe. There is no problem with some technology coming and displacing it, because it's not a narrow view. If you're good at what you do, whether it's operational or, as he put it, the abstract part of the analytical process, once you decide what you're good at, your next problem becomes implementation or execution. And that is the area where you need to focus on to build your career. He mentioned very clearly what are the kind of entry level salaries, what are the kind of progressions that you can make. And the wonderful part of this is that you don't need to be confined to just one particular role. There are adjacencies, there are similar kind of roles you can take up, and there's a whole lot of opportunities which are opening up if you keep your eyes and ears open, rather than saying, "This is my job, I will excel at it," because there is so much happening that you can definitely look at uh, expanding your portfolio and your skills. In the final segment, I'll be speaking to Ashok about what he thinks the future of supply chain technology is, and what are the problems that need to be solved as he sees it in the world of today. So, what are the kind of things you're grappling with right now, Ashok? What are the that supply chain, people who come in are trying to solve?
Right now, I mean, now tech is everything. AI is where uh, people are looking to see, and we're at an inflection point pretty clearly. Just as
Right.
uh, the internet was a big inflection point uh, back 25 years ago, I think we're now seeing the infusion of AI into pretty much every discipline uh, being a major inflection point. It's going to, in fact, coincidentally, tomorrow I'm going to be hosting a roundtable talking to leaders of supply chains uh, in Mumbai on how they are starting to look at um, bringing in AI into some of their functions, uh,
Okay.
into some aspects of their their works. These are CXOs that are coming in uh, because and it will have its sort of progression and typically in my experience there'll be an acceleration of adoption and then there'll be a lull where people are fine tuning it and refining it and then there'll be a second wave and so forth. But I think right now, the stage at which AI is and how and what we are going to use it for is going to be very critical in the next 12 to 18 to 24 months, which is exciting from my standpoint. And I personally, I'll be honest with you, I've gone through the cycles of, hey, is this going to completely make jobs disappear? Is it going to make people completely redundant? Or is it going to be a tool which can be used? I think uh, frankly, I think we've seen this if you go back even a century ago, when mechanization came into agriculture, uh, it had its effect on labor, but at the same time, it brought into effect other industries, etc. So I'm not yet ready to sign up for or onto the doomsday scenario yet, saying all jobs are going to be taken over. uh, and but I can definitely see uh, that there's going to be some exciting new innovations coming out uh, in the way uh, I think people are going to be buying product, people are going to be receiving the product and that they've ordered, the amount in which they're able to customize. I think all aspects are going to become so much more agile and so much more responsive in being able to sort of sense what the customer is looking for and how you are being positioned to fulfill that sort of requirement. That's going to be the exciting part. If you remember,
Okay.
I talked about those, people being able to predict P&G and Kimberly Clark being able to predict when I would be needing, diapers for our kids. Think about that, but across all aspects of our day-to-day consumption, right? But make that effective and make that happen is going to require a whole different set of skill sets, technology shaped and built for those kinds of workflows and those kinds of requirements. And therein lies the opportunity for the people today to come in and say, wow, the user experience can be so much better if we do this. So those set of skill sets is what I think people should be starting to look at, and that's going to be exciting for all the people who are starting out, or early stage professionals in supply chain. So
There
I'm
is
I'm I'm net
right.
positive on sentiment right now.
Okay, this a point that the author of the book, The Box, makes, which says that in Africa, the development of ports has been very, very slow. And as a result, manufacturing investment is not going to come into Africa because of transport and logistics being such a major issue. He says that Singapore, by in the 60s, by concentrating on being one of the biggest shipping points, managed to leverage that into the development of the entire country. They were at the right place at the right time, but
Right.
they adopted that particular strategy and managed to ensure that they were among the first to implement port technologies and shipping technologies, which to date are among the most sophisticated in the world.
Mhm.
So, do you believe that there are these fundamental, what do you say, things that hold countries and economies back? Or you can't get away in today's world. You can't say that I don't need, to develop these aspects. The technology will manage. But do I need a foundation of ports, a foundation of great networks? Isn't that what this is all built upon?
No, I think two things are for real. One is physical infrastructure is super critical. Uh,
Right.
Countries' GDP depends on how quickly you're able to move product. If it takes me
Right.
5 days to move goods from, let's say, Bombay to Chennai, that's 5 days where I can't book revenue until it reaches, my
Right.
my facility.
Right.
If and
Right.
therefore, but if I'm able to move it in a day or two, I'm able to book the revenue, which means my GDP has registered,
Right.
that much growth. So physical infrastructure is super, super important. You cannot, there's no point doing all the technology and putting it, to your point, designing a great solution if you cannot execute well. And well means speed. Speed is, a factor that, gives you uh, uh, output and growth for sure. So, but it's both. I think it's the physical infrastructure and the supporting technology is what gives you the vector. Otherwise, these are both scalar quantities, right? So, uh, velocity without direction is sort of is is kind of meaningless. So you
Yeah.
need both of these things to work to truly make a difference. Uh, and you know, from I'll talk about India for sure. I think because it's a big country, it's a diverse country. The challenges are kind of broader, whether it is, and the modes of transport are also sort of difficult. Um, but rail, road, waterways, we've got to basically exploit all possible, uh, modes of transport in order to move goods uh, from one corner of the world to the other, one corner of the country to the other. So, yeah, no, I don't think we can escape that reality,
Right. Right. Which
And then the
again,
imposition of the right tech stack is also super important with safeguards built into it, for security purposes or
right. Right.
etc.
And it also means that opportunities or career opportunities are open in any field where the runway is huge. So if you are at
Correct.
the initial starting stage of any particular of putting a whole set of systems together, you join in any one of those, you still have a chance of making it. Another thing that came through from a guest that I spoke to is that he's a person who is responsible for implementing FASTag across the country, and he was saying that one of the biggest shortages that he found was cross domain expertise.
Yeah.
People tend to specialize in what they know best, but knowing a whole lot of things about multiple uh, aspects is probably one of the best ways in which you can accelerate your career now.
Right.
Do you agree to that, or do you feel that there are other ways in which people can set themselves a target and then move?
No, I think I completely understand, where this person is coming from, and I completely agree. The advantage, I think, and therefore finding people with the right aptitude to seek out and then absorb this information is really going to be uh, the the trick that managers or leaders can be looking out for. In other words, engineers going into banking, was not the most intuitive sort of career path, but the bankers back in the day, they figured that, hey, what we need is analytical skills and logical thought process, and who better than engineering grads? So you got a whole bunch of IIT folks,
Yeah,
going into banking.
yeah,
While we can sort of laugh at that, the outcomes have not been that bad. Because
yeah, not
ultimately,
at
what
all.
it means is, the you know these students have the aptitude to go adapt, learn the banking domain. Same thing holds true today, where this cross domain information. The advantage is there is so much information available. So I work with you know being in a startup, I work with, 20 somethings, pretty much 99%. I'm the one guy who probably is dragging the average up to, 25 or 24, whatever. But the, the generation that is young today or coming in is tuned to absorb a lot of information. So they know so much, and they're also able to sort of know intuitively uh, what they need to learn, what makes sense, and what is not required. And that's a skill set which, given our backgrounds, we were told what to study, we studied it, and then sort of figured out as we went along. And it took maybe 10, 20 years. But what we learned in 20 years, I think this generation can learn probably in 20 months. And so you've got to respect that. But picking those people with the aptitude to pick up information across domains is what I think we need to be looking for, and then giving them the avenues to go look, hey, go study up this material, go
Yeah.
find out more about
What
this.
is
Is
your experience, Ashok? That's interesting that you are the one senior person who's got decades of experience and all the others are kind of, so what's that experience like? Because in most cases the in companies it was inverted. That is, you had a middle layer which was largely middle aged, you had a top layer which was large, and you had all the entry level positions where people had practically no experience. Now it's all flipped. You have one senior person like you said, and in a startup where, let's say,
A
all the
couple.
rest. So what is
Oh,
that experience like?
I love it. I love it. I absolutely find it fantastic because I feed off their energy. Um, I get a tremendous amount of insights into the way they think, they approach, they solve
Right.
problems. For my experience has been nothing but positive in the sense that they're looking for guidance, they're looking for our experiences. A lot of it is what they don't have much time for is you know uh, for somebody to give long-winded sort of answers to questions. They say, no, no, I got it. So you got to sort of tune your uh, message and package it in the way that
Yeah.
it sort of resonates with them, which is where I get my kicks. I'll give you a small little anecdote. So,
Yeah.
we were going through I can tell you what an AOP is, and you'll probably get it right off the bat.
Right.
Uh, so my colleague Badri he says, hey, for those, and he also acknowledges that, people are young and, they may not be familiar with the term AOP. Now, so they say, this is an annual operating plan, and we're just trying to put this together and all that kind of stuff. So uh, it struck me that, okay, maybe, all we have to do is tell them that, hey, for you Gen Zers, this is what you guys call a vision board. So, 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 I got some props for that, but uh, to be current, to get uh, into their way of thinking, for me is fantastic. I love it. I really love it, and it sort of
And
gives you an opportunity to learn. Yeah,
yeah, no, and that is a great part. It's almost like, you spend all your life working and learning and getting to the top in various professions or various companies. And suddenly you have a chance to mentor or be at the top of a set of people who are all, separated by age, but not by mindset, by what you just said.
correct.
Especially when you're hiring smart young people who have an ability to absorb a lot more. And maybe
Yeah,
that's the other part. There's always a mix of the old and the new that you need. It can't be that exuberance can sort of, an attitude can sort of make up for everything else because, the
100. Yeah, 100%. That's exactly. Uh, I think we also need to, as leaders and managers, I think we need to also be sensitive to uh, their their sort of broader outlook, their worldview,
yeah,
which
very true.
sometimes I see a lot of people questioning the millennials and Gen Z. Uh, but I think it is what it is. I mean, I'm sure our parents looked at us and worried greatly about our future, and
So it's the same. It's just a
I
generational
think
change.
it's the same,
I've
but we
been,
just
yeah.
we should be
Now, I've been
sensitive
asked
to.
this question as to why this podcast goes on for an hour when the normal attention span is 10 minutes and 20 minutes. And the only defense that I have is that if it's a profession that you want to look a little deeply at, 1 hour is nothing in the context of a lifetime. If it's going to help you make a decision for a lifetime, you don't need reels and shorts. You need
Correct.
some serious, you know, thread of people who've been through that whole problem, because you can't compress 30 years of experience into 10 minutes. Even 1 hour is a bit iffy, but at least in terms of being able to get the broad contours and map it out, I think it's important. So that's why we stuck to this format, to say that the people who are interested will watch, the others will, you know. So if you're interested in logistics, you're interested in the supply chain, and you're interested in finding out more, I'm sure that the conversation we've had over the last 1 hour is a fairly good indicator of what you can expect and what you can be prepared for. So Any closing thoughts, Ashok?
No, I think it's a great time. I think you're doing an excellent job of pulling all these kinds of uh, conversations and circulating it. I had a lot of fun talking to you. I think hopefully your viewers get some useful insights out of it as well. And thanks once again.
Great. Great having you, Ashok. And
Thanks, Vedan.
good to have finally caught up with you after all the time we've been planning this.
Yeah, sorry, I've been a little busy and
No, no, no.
traveling,
It's,
but
I'm glad we finally managed to make it happen. Thank
yeah,
you.
cool.